The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, welcome everyone to this state of testing roundtable discussion. My name is Joel, and I'm PractiTest Chief Solution Architect, and I want to thank everyone for joining today's session. Together with me, and again, we're going to introduce everyone a little bit later on. We have Bhamare from Titan Testers, as well as Keith Klain and Matt Heusser with us. So, before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, the session is being recorded at this point, so we will be able to share it with everyone, either who joined or who was not able to join. So don't worry, we will be sending it via email in the next 24 hours, I guess. We will try to have towards the end of the presentation about 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, if there's anything that we're talking about that actually blows your mind and you want to learn more about it, so you can go ahead and ask any questions. And again, we're going to review them and hopefully answer a couple of them towards the end. And the last thing that we also want to share with you is that obviously we love social and we believe that everyone should be socially connected. So we have a hashtag for today's webinar. It's going to be state of testing. If there's anything that you want to discuss or share to everyone else, either now or after the session has been over, go ahead to Twitter. We're going to be monitoring that afterwards as well. Just use state of testing and we will be more than happy to go over that as well. So a little bit of introductions, meaning who's going to be taking part of today's roundtable. I'm going to start by myself. So I'm Joel. I'm actually PractiTest Chief Solution Architect. I'm also the QA manager of the company. And well, I've been around testing for, I think, about 20 years now. It sounds a little bit too much to me, but I guess that's what it is. I've been in all sorts of companies, starting from Mercury Interactive. Right now it's HP Enterprise, a bunch of startups, and right now I've been in practice for a bunch of years. If you hear my accent being a little bit squinky, that's because I'm actually Costa Rican. And I could go ahead and speak in Spanish today, and I actually reside in Israel, so I could go ahead and speak in English, in Hebrew as well. But again, so pardon if I speak a little bit weird sometimes. And you can always read a little bit about what I think about in my QA blog at .practice.com. So let's move over to other people who are here. And Lalit, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, Joel. Thank you so much. Do you mind checking once if your slides are shared? I doubt I see them, but I will still go ahead with the introductions. Hello, everybody. Lalit here from Tea Time with Testers. Just a little bit about myself. I'm currently working with one of the large social network in Europe as a senior test engineer, and also looking after Tea Time with Testers magazine as its chief editor co-founder. When not testing for my employer, I teach BBFT foundations with AST, and I also assist James Buck in his rapid software testing online class. And now let me introduce you with our star panelists today. We have Keith Klain. He has recently taken over as Executive Director and Head of Software Quality Management for TakeMark Global Solutions. Keith has been in software testing industry for 20 years now. He has multinational experience of managing software quality and leading testing teams, especially in finance and other IT consulting firms. Keith has played an instrumental role in Perscola's with its software testing education program with Bronx Best non-profit organization. And he was also the recipient of 2013's Software Test Professionals Luminary Award. We also have...
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Keith.
Hi, Keith. We also have Matthew Heusser with us. I don't really think Keith and Matt really need an introduction, but just in case you guys don't know, Matt is Managing Director of Excellent Development and a long-time consultant, trainer, and contributor on software project. Matt is widely known for his writing, especially with his book, How to Reduce the Cost of Software Testing. He's also editor with Sticky Minds and recipient of 2 prestigious awards, one of them being Most Popular Online Contributor to Agile and Most Influential Agile Test Professional Person, given to him by Potsdam in Germany. Matt is also associated with creating lean software testing family of methods, and he was one of the board of directors with AST USA. Joel, would you like to start the discussion and also tell us a little bit about the project itself?
Yes, and by the way, before I say that, Matt is actually also a very again, he speaks quite a lot about multiple topics. And Matt, I think that you're doing an additional webinar later this month. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's thank you, Joel. It's going to be May 24th. I believe it's it's 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be on reducing the cost and factors around the cost of mobile testing. So basically what we did for the book in 2011 brought to date with some of the changes we've seen and some things that we've learned. It's going to be for a company called JAMO Solutions out of Belgium. And if you register for this webinar, I believe you should get an invitation to that one. And
yeah.
Just like this, there's no cost. It's free information. There's going to be a brief demo of some of JAMO's tools after my presentation, which is just on factors around the cost of mobile testing.
Okay, and yes, and we'll try to actually spread the word on that. And okay, so let's actually move forward, as Lalit was saying. And before we actually go over the discussion, I do want to talk a little bit about the state of testing as a project. I guess that many of you are already familiar, maybe most of you. The idea of the state of testing actually starts with a survey that we run once a year. This is the third time running. And the state of testing came up as an idea that, Lalit and myself were talking about it, that there was no, or there is no real and global perspective on what's happening on the testing community, meaning what are we doing, what is taking our times, what is actually, where are we moving to? And we came up with this idea of trying to create a survey that would actually go through as many people, obviously, as we could, and try to get as much information. So we started back in 2013. It's a yearly, but again, because shifting from December to January, then we did 2013, 2015, and the last year was actually the one that we ran on 2016. And this one actually has been the biggest yet. We had over 1,000 participants worldwide taking part of the survey and answering. And one of the biggest things that we actually did here, we do believe, as I mentioned, in the community. So we went to a lot of people in the community, a lot of bloggers, a lot of tweeters, a lot of people all around, and we say, hey guys, help us to spread the word. And we couldn't have reached so many people without them. So I think it's not even the whole list, but it's most of the people who actually helped us with that. And I'm mentioning that because all the time we get a lot of people saying, hey, I want to help out with this project. If you want to help out with this project next year, we will actually be calling out for more people to contact us and to work with us. So feel free. We can always use any help we can. And again, the whole idea is to benefit all of the community, to get as much information. The survey is obviously free, and you can download it from the QA blog. And we try to make it as available as possible. So much so that this year, and again, people are liking it so much that it's been already translated. And I know that it's been translated to Russian, Ukrainian, Hebrew, Dutch, and German. I think that it's also being translated to Spanish. And again, if you want to translate it for yourselves, reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to help you out on the process. Just send us an email to stateoftesting@practitest.com. And again, the idea is to help the community. And obviously, next year, we're going to be going out on the 4th edition and so on and so forth. We really, really like the results that we're getting here. So enough about an introduction. And I think that what everyone is actually very interested on is going over the stuff that we found in the survey and actually going about it. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be actually going over findings of the survey, trying to look for questions around it, and then obviously we're going to let Matt and Keith actually give us their inputs on it. And we're going to start from this trend that actually caught our eye. We're seeing two separate things that we believe might be connected. On the one hand, year after year after year, we're seeing that testing teams are becoming smaller and smaller, okay? And basically, we're seeing that, again, around 35% of the people who respond said, hey, my testing is about 5 people or 1 to 5 people. And again, the numbers are getting smaller all the time. On the other hand, and maybe it's hand in hand with this, we're seeing that a lot of organizations are actually shifting towards agile and DevOps. Now, the question that we had in here, we believe that both of these things are related, but we want to ask other people if they think themselves the same thing. But maybe more importantly, how will these two trends affect the day-to-day work of the regular Joe tester in these teams? Meaning, should he or she be modifying something that he does? Should he or she be worried about it? And again, where is this going to lead us later on? So, Matt, why don't we start with you? What do you think about these two trends?
Well, it's not really a huge surprise, but it's good to have some data around it. Across, pretty much all of my commercial clients, I see testers increasingly embedded as team members in a multidisciplinary team. I also see development growing faster than testing is growing. So testing is still growing. Maybe 5% a year, but development is growing 10, 15%. So the ratio of testers to developers is decreasing, and the testers there's no test project anymore. If we're going to something like DevOps, we're going to be delivering all the time. There's no test project to manage, so you don't need your testing group. Now, that's not universal, but it is a trend that I would expect to see show up in these numbers.
Okay. Keith, what do you think about this?
Well, I found this to be interesting because I think, looking at the demographics of the respondents to it, you probably need to dig a little bit deeper into some of those numbers, but some of this might be related to some selection bias around who's responding, because I don't think, my context is primarily in enterprise technology, which is, non-technology companies that build technology, so like Barclays, right? And although we had a large amount of people in our global test center, I would say the average test team size for any particular project was in that 1 to 5 range anyway. So I think some of this might be how things are being defined. And also there's a bit of a potential blur if you look at agile or agile-like or waterfall-like, when we're talking about these kind of agile transitions and a shift to more lean process and methods, there's probably a bit of blend in between there. So if we worked with this company who was probably standard in calling their method Wagile, right? So it's a blend between waterfall and agile. So does that go under agile or agile-like, or does that go under waterfall or waterfall-like? So there's probably a bit of a blend there. I think what might be an undercurrent here is that as organizations are trying to, the enterprise or scale agile, they're reorganizing, but I think from a boots on the ground perspective, I can't see that you're suddenly going to have, you went from 25 testers down to 5 just because you transitioned to agile. Because one, I don't think a kind of true adoption is I've seen really anywhere yet in the enterprise. So I think we don't want to, correlation doesn't, or causation doesn't necessarily mean correlation, or correlation doesn't mean causation. But I think there's a desire to do that, but some of this might just be kind of deck chair reshuffling. I don't know what you guys think, but that seems like it to me.
I actually have a question here, and that is, again, something that I am seeing lately, and I talked with a lot of people, and well, apparently most of the people that I do talk are test managers, and these guys are actually kind of afraid. They're saying, hey, DevOps is catching up, and Agile is catching up. I'm not sure that I'm going to have a job 5 years from now. Do you think is that for real? Are testers, even if testers do not disappear, and I agree with Matt, I think that more and more people are being testers. Maybe we're not growing as fast, but do you think that maybe the test manager role is going to disappear? And if yes, why or why not? What do you think, Keith?
Well, I mean, one, I think if you work anywhere, you should. What's that? Andy Grove quote? Only the paranoid survive, right? So I think a healthy dose of fear is only going to serve you well. But if I were a test manager in a giant COE, or I was what I call an operational test manager, someone who just manages people, managers of managers, does spreadsheets, does reporting, yeah, I would live in constant fear because I don't view personally that role as adding a lot of value. So I think if you can articulate what you're doing for the organization, how it's managing risk and protecting the brand and providing great information, I don't think you have to fear for your job too much in testing, because you're always going to be able to find something for that person to do. I think if you're not any good at that, yeah, you're probably subject. And some of this, the last kind of 10 years of, you know, the ramping up of agile testing, which I don't know that that's a thing, but a lot of the marketing and branding of agile as a service by consultancies and everything else, to me, feels a lot like second verse, same as the first. You know, we had this with the Rational Unified Process, Extreme Programming, DSDM, you know, all these kind of iterative and rapid application development methodologies that all promised reduction in testing time and cycles and less people and more automation, and haven't delivered on that a whole lot. So, I mean, I don't know what you're saying, Matt, but I don't think if people can articulate the value, they have too much to worry about in terms of losing their job.
Yeah, and thank you, Keith. So a couple things that just struck out at me as I'm looking at this. One is 82% are agile and 39% are waterfall, and if you add that up, that's 120, 110, like that's
I can clarify
that's
that.
more than 100%.
Yeah.
Right? Like what does that mean? So it means I think Keith said agile, and I think it's fair that as agile has gone mainstream, companies that couldn't do this or couldn't do that and had to so agile has become sort of stand-up sprints and stories. I would guess those people that check both check boxes are probably doing stand-up sprints and stories, and there's not a ton of value in that. So when Keith says it's kind of the I've heard this song and dance before about how you're going to revolutionize and transform things. I have some sympathy for that position, and I've also seen some high-functioning teams that are remarkably successful, and it takes a lot of change.
Yeah, Matt, I actually had a question for you that's related to this. How do you see, like, because, you know, working with a lot of these organizations, what I'm seeing is people who call something agile, and I'm interested in, but that really means, like, they haven't, there's no product owners. There's, like, you know, there's certain things that I would kind of, like, half expect to see as an agile adoption. What do you see as, like, indicators of people who are saying they're doing agile? Like, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's a clear question, but I'm.
Oh, sure.
Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you have people that stand-ups are pretty easy to do every day. Cutting the work down into small chunks that you can dribble out. Stories, pretty easy to do. And 2-week sprints, pretty easy to do. So in the extreme example, and most companies aren't quite this bad, we have people who say things to me like, well, we plan the entire project, and then we have about 3 architecture sprints, and then we have a couple of design sprints or requirement sprints, and then we have coding sprints, and then we have hardening sprints. And I'm like, that's a waterfall project. Yeah, but we stand up every day, right? In our different
exactly.
The test team stands up every day, and the development team stands up every day, and the analysts stand up every day. So there is this kind of watering down effect where these radically, truly, genuinely different ideas about how to do development came into the organization, and we say, we can't do that, and we can't do this, and we can't do that, and give us those 3 things. And then you get, even if all you add is stand-ups to a traditional, lame, slow delivery cycle, where you would send an email and get a response next week. Now you can get it, you know, get your problem resolved in the same day. You still get some improvement. But Agile is everything on the spectrum from genuine extreme programming, even better now with some of the DevOps stuff. Those are I hate to say it, but that's kind of the exception. And this kind of status quo, we do stand-up sprints and stories has become, it was a cast in 2011 that James Boggs said, Agile has become, we have a card wall and stories move across the wall. It's very disappointing. So you got to dig into the context. What do you say when you mean that? And I think that's where those two numbers that add up to 120 are coming from.
Okay. Great insight, guys. By the way, we do need to continue moving forward, so I'm going to cut this discussion here, even though it's actually pretty amazing. Lalit, I think that you had a follow-up question on this trend towards Agile and DevOps, right?
Yes, yes. I have a question here, and it's very much similar to what Keith and Matt are discussing. So I have noticed that typical Agile with capital A or DevOps teams tend to ignore defects even if testers find them before production. They tend to ignore it unless large number of users are affected or unless more users actually complain about them. What do you think about this perception of quality? If in particular context, like if customer is at center, if every customer matters, then I see this thing as contradictory, but do you think this is a problem, and if testers can do anything to change this? Matt, what do you think about it?
Actually, I think some of that might go back to what Keith mentioned earlier, that they say this team is supposed to be agile, but there's no product owner. There's no person that represents the customer. Even with the product owner, it's tenuous because the product owner is the single person whose job it is to assimilate what all of the customers, who are the users, want. So if you look at the Agile Manifesto, let's get closer to our customers, let's get closer to our users, let's collaborate, and then these teams that say, look how agile we are, that don't have that relationship. What can you do as a tester? There's a couple things that I've done in the past. So I've been in the situation doing testing where I turn to a programmer and explain a problem, and he doesn't want to fix it. That's really awkward, and it's silly. It wastes a lot of time. Preferably, I want some of those bugs just don't flow through. Let's improve first-time quality. Why am I discovering this at the end? But and what I try to do is find those decision makers. See, I think when we talk about product owners in Agile, like it's the guy that defines what all the stuff is going to be. But often there are downstream consequences of decisions. Feature A and feature B work together in such a way that some strange thing happens nobody expected. The spec is met, but there are consequences. No one said the error message for the pop-up, so it just says some ridiculous error message, to be defined or something. The tester sees the pop-up, and the tester says, here's what it should look like. The testers are very good at the detail level product owner stuff, just because we see bugs every day, and we need an oracle, we need a way to know what the right answer should be. So I want to develop a relationship with my product owner, so that I can say, look, the product owner is going to make us fix it. We can go down the hall and have that conversation. If you need to, we can talk for an hour. He's going to make you fix it. My challenge personally is to say that in a team-oriented way and not a confrontational way, right? I usually need to stop and think about it before just the words come out of my mouth. But if I can get to know what the product owner would do if he was sitting next to us, then and that comes to like getting into their mind, then I can kind of become a sort of junior product owner. It's a little bit more than some people would argue. That's not testing, but it can be a very, very effective skill to have on a project. And you're asking me not how do I find the bug, but how do I get it fixed?
Thanks, Matt. Keith, do you have similar opinion or any other views on this?
Yeah, I think to just follow up on Matt's point at the end there is that, some people call it quality advocacy for QA, and I think that can be a really important role to play, because part of your, keeping on mission with testing is to mine information for people to use, and so I'm I would probably put that in the scope of testing, Matt, if it was adding value to the mission of what you're trying to find out about the product. So, I would agree with that.
Cool. Thank you.
There's one other thing I would add, and that's you can help explain consequences. So, I said get in the mind of the product owner. What if the product owner says, well, we're not going to fix it, and you sort of have this emotional, visceral experience? I can quantify, I know this is going to impact this percentage of people, it's going to cause these problems, and we know through history that people would have these problems, don't renew when it comes to renewal time based on customer support feedback. You can provide that information up to help actually change the decision. And it those two kind of go together, I think.
Okay, and by the way,
Thank you so much, Matt.
we actually have a question
Yes,
about
Joel.
that a little bit later, so hold a little bit of those points.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I do want to remind everyone on the call, if there's anything that, again, obviously Keith and Matt or ourselves are actually saying, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them, and we will have a little bit of Q&A time, hopefully, towards the end. Now, moving forward, and we talked a lot about Agile and DevOps and teams, let's actually move to another very hot topic, I think, and that is automation. We're seeing it every year. Automation keeps increasing and increasing. A lot of people are saying that they have more and more. But we're seeing actually that it's increasing on different focal points within the organization, maybe within the process. So, well, is it an end-to-end process? Do you see like every single different team within the project is going to have different automations? How is automation going to look in the future? And maybe more importantly, if automation is something that is going to be so widely available everywhere, does every tester needs to be involved in automation? And if so, how? And Keith, let's start actually with you. What do you think about automation as again in the process?
Well, I was just talking about this down at Star East last week, and it seems to be kind of the third rail of software testing, where you're either for it or against it. If you have a critique of someone's tool or strategy around automation, you're suddenly a Luddite who is against all automation or thinks automation is bad, and you just want to keep gigantic manual testing teams employed forever. And so I think, as an industry and as a community, there's much more nuance that can be added to this discussion than's currently tolerated. So my view on this is that, if you look at these numbers here, if 75% of the still have a massive investment in functional or regression testing in terms of automation, I would question the numbers around Agile or Agile-like, because I think those two tend to run contrary to each other. So I think there's still a massive sunken cost investment in the existing automation that's being done. And I'm speaking specifically about the enterprise. And you'll look at organizations that are trying to do Agile transitions, but they cannot let go of this massive regression pack that they keep adding to year after year after year, and want to repurpose that towards somehow adding value to, frankly, a lot of machine checking that should be done much earlier on, and let that go. So I think there's still, a big investment that needs to be wisely or unwisely maintained there. So I'm not surprised to see that number. I bet it's much larger than that. A lot of the DevOps work that I'm seeing is really at the developer level, and I have some smallish tech companies. I haven't seen this role of an SDET or someone who builds DevOps scripts or automation for developers. Most organizations I've seen are trying to integrate that into the developer's workload. So I see it two things. One, there's a continuing need for maintaining the existing investment in all these gigantic regression automation packs, and that there's probably an opportunity to reskill into DevOps, continuous integration roles for testers. But frankly, I see that's probably more related to then becoming a developer, and that using some of your testing skills as a core or full stack developer.
Oh, sorry. Matt, what do you think about it? Maybe let's even focus on the other question, and Keith started answering it, but am I a tester who only knows manual testing? And again, let's be sincere about it. There are many testers who are quote unquote afraid of automation. They feel it's beyond them or something like that. Do they have a future? what do they need to do today?
So I'm sorry, I'm just struck by some of the data here in the trend.
You know what? Let me explain it a little bit, because it might be a little bit confusing.
I want to speak to it. I've got some thoughts that might be helpful. Before we jump to your job is going to go away, oh no, better learn to code sort of stuff. So if I could just take a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things really struck me when I look at this. We've only got 46% continuous integration, 75% functional regression testing. What that means is for 29%, some large percentage of the audience, right? About a third of the people that are doing functional testing, when their boss comes in and says, "Can we release? We've got a new build." You don't say, "Oh, of course, it just came back green bar from Jenkins. Let's think about what some of the risks might be and think if we need to explore it and get this thing out the door." But instead you say, "Well, we just got a new build. So we need to set it up on a server and then set up the data, and then we'll run the test tooling, and if that comes back green bar, then well, let's talk this afternoon," right? And that's the best case for that. There are tools. I know I have teams that run regression testing automated, and it's a multi-hour process, right? It might be tomorrow morning we come in and there are some errors, and we got to get those fixed, and then the next day we come in, and then we can ship it. So if you're not doing CI, but you're doing functional regression test automation, you have somewhere between a 2-hour and 2-day delay. That's not what management thought they were getting when they bought this test automation tool. So, and it's similarly with the unit testing. That's really strange, because we said 82% of teams were agile. About half of those are doing unit testing. So you're trying to ship often, but you're not doing test-driven development. You're not writing unit tests. That means your code's going to be buggy, which means you're going to have really, really expensive fixed retest cycles. So what that tells me is the industry, technically, is nowhere near the kind of way we talk. Like the agile adoption isn't, for some large percentage of companies, the agile adoption isn't real yet. And so that's a long way of backing into your question about, so if you're a tester on one of those teams and you're good and you can be responsive and you don't need to create a ton of documentation, you're not a traditional old-fashioned boring scripted tester, you can add a ton of value for the foreseeable future in an organization like that. I find that even high-functioning teams, there's a value that an exploratory tester can add. There may be less of you, the ratio may be changing. The problem is not keeping your job. It may be changing jobs because your subject matter expertise won't be there, and the market currently has problems recognizing testing skill. So that's a long way of answering a short question.
Okay. By the way, I do want to clarify a little bit of the numbers, because it's even worse than what you both were saying. And maybe I should have explained before. When we say that 75% functional or regression testing, that means that 75% of the people who responded these questions said we do have functional regression testing. I remember looking into the numbers, the percentage of regression testing then drops very, very much. And most people say, hey, we have between 15 and 40%. So right in the middle. And that's what they have. So that best day scenario that you say, well, 2 hours to 2 days, that's only for the percentages that they have automated, whereas most of regression is still not automated in most of the companies out there. So it's even worse than that. And I imagine the same goes for unit testing. And we see quite a lot. Yes, we do have unit testing for what coverage? I don't really know. So what does it mean?
But see, yeah, and Joe, this is what drives me a little bit nuts about our industry is that, we become a bit like the, 5-year-old soccer team, right? Where so people go, oh, we've got all this investment. We need to automate our regression packs, which we've been trying to do for the last 20 years. So everyone runs out and buys, QTP and SmartBear and all these other, functional regression testing tools. And so, wait a minute, now we need, DevOps. So let's all go buy this, and instead of actually asking, what do we need to be automated? What information are we trying to derive from our test approach, and let that guide the decisions we make around automation? People just rush around figuring out, well, what should I be doing next with the tool? Let's talk about tooling and technology as opposed to objectives. And maybe I'm getting too old, but I feel like we're still not really answering that question as an industry. And there's a lot of, to Matt's point, I've worked with a financial services company recently where the person who was paying for the tooling, the CTO, when I was talking to them about the strategy, and I was describing, well, we got to make sure that, we're not just automating things that can be automated. And he's like, look, whatever we have, I do not want a giant regression pack that just gets added to year after year after year after year. I said, great, that's what we don't want as well. I go do the review with the engineers, and that's exactly what they were doing. They weren't even, I asked them, how do you decide which tests that you're going to automate? And they said, well, we're just the ones that we can. And that's still going on. This is just very recent work. So I think it's a bit frustrating when we focus on, just the technology aspect to this and not the strategy aspect to it. And that's where I think you see a lot of, the frustration with, C-level folks and management with our business. That it gets devalued because we do a lot of dumb things.
Yeah, and I've worked with teams that have some idea of what their components are responsible for, right? And they know what the change was, so they can triage that change against the risks and do a quick smoke burn down kind of a test and get to a ship decision relatively quickly, just as humans. So when we say we're going to automate, and now we can make a ship decision in 8 hours instead of 3, like, what just happened? Like,
right.
I think stepping back, we could look at where are we now, how long does it take to make these types of decisions, what risk are we taking on, where do we want to get to? If we had done that, we might come to a very different decision about what improvement means to us over the next 12 months.
Okay, great, guys. And actually, this takes me to the next trend and to the next question, and let me explain why. And we touched this point a couple of times already in the session. We usually ask on the survey, which are the most important skills of your tester? And again, general methodologies and mobile and web and security and customer facing and agile. And there's a list of about 12 or 15 and even an open question afterwards. And every single year, the most important one is always communication skills. And this year in particular, meaning only 2% of people said, hey, communication skills are not important. And I'm really wondering who these guys were who said that. But even if you say the very important, it's by far the biggest one. And we've talked about communication about it, but I want to talk more specifically. So yes, communications is the most important skill. But what specifically about communications? Okay, and I have my ideas and I will talk about them, but I want to get your thoughts on this. What communication skills are the most important? And if I'm a tester, maybe starting my job, maybe even a test lead or QA manager starting my job in this position, what should I do in order to improve this specific set of communication skills? We started with Keith last time, so let's go to Matt. Matt, what do you think?
It's just such a challenging topic, right? I mean, the classic ways to split up communication would be verbal, written, nonverbal. But that really feels weak. So most important, it's hard to generalize, but if you're meeting people face to face to figure out who are the decision makers and how do they like to communicate. So again, we're back to take the product owner out to lunch, ask them what's important to them, get it articulated, make it transparent, And learning to tease information out of people is a genuine skill. Learning to get people to talk. And most of the time, for most of the teams I've worked with lately that are moving toward more face-to-face communications, I definitely say that. Another, just for geeks, is that we tend to focus on facts and details and logic, and just recognizing if you can meet face-to-face with someone, the look on their face, and they say yes, but their face says no, that's huge. And I got into computers because I couldn't figure out people. You know, people would invite you over for lunch and be upset because you would take them up on it and they didn't really mean it. Just bizarre. People, humans they care more about the kind of shoes you're wearing than the content of your ideas. There's all these obstacles you have to overcome. So I got into technology because if there was a bug in the software that I wrote, it would be my mistake, and if it would do the same thing every time, even if there was a bug in it. And eventually I realized that the keys to success, it's always, the software just exists for the people. So eventually I started to get into the communication skills. I'd say to start with the face-to-face stuff. There's a great book by Zinsser on writing well, and that talks a lot. So the written communication skills is a long road to hoe. And it's a lot of work. I guess they both are, but that's where I'd start with the writing. I realize that's kind of a shallow answer to a very complex question, so I'm curious what thoughts Keith has offhand.
Well, I mean, we are time constrained, but that you could probably do an entire discussion on this topic, which, you know, I would agree is repeatedly raised as one of the biggest things. And you know, I would, so in terms of communication, I would completely concur with Matt on the face-to-face and in person. I think that's where I've had my most success with communicating with people is in person, because people do, you know, in written or electronic communication or even webinars or you know, video calls, you know, act differently than when you're physically in the same room with them. Things I generally stress is because people tend to focus a lot on, you know, what they're communicating out, but I actually think the more highly tuned skills in terms of communication, which is listening and trying to pick up, you know, as Matt alluded to, on nonverbal communication and what they're really saying. And I think another, so listening is probably the most important communication skill, because people tend to focus on what they're trying to get across, but there's much more information that you need, even if you want your idea to be adopted, about where they're at, what they're feeling, and how they communicate back to you. And then I think, from my view, that starts with the mindset in which you approach your communication. And I think that's where, particularly in the kind of skilled testing, context-driven testing community, we have a lot of work to do. And that's around starting from a position of humility and empathy and self-awareness and understanding how you're contributing to an issue or the lack of communication, and make that your starting space, and then try and find out information, because that you'll generally have a better result. And, you know, I mean, I have a, you know, reputation for arguing with people, and, you know, I can get angry, but I pick and choose when I want to be angry, and I pick and choose when I've controlled anger, and I pick and choose when I want to argue. And I think we tend to, in the context-driven testing community, or testers in general, can be a bit kind of a whingy bunch and argue a lot. And I think some of that's good in our community, but when we're trying to be a service to a project, you know, we need to pick our battles. And again, I think starting from a different position, particularly when we're trying to get information from people or communicate with them, those are probably the toughest skills. I would say, in terms of resources for people listening here, Interactional Expertise is a great book. Harry Collins, wrote, for written, I generally point people to Michael Bolton's work around test reporting, like a reporter, and how to write that out. And then probably in the last 10 years, I've been reading a lot of Scott Birkin's work on just his general communication style and around a great book on the myths of innovation and how to do presentations are stuff I would point people to if they want to learn from people who are really good at this.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree that if you read good writing and you do disciplined practice, you can develop your written communication skills. A lot of that is about your audience. One thing I did want to mention, in the surveys that I've done, the interviews that I've done, working with people that I've done, everybody views testing through the lens of their own life experience. So when a programmer looks at testing, he says, oh, a simple, straightforward business process. You should automate, because that's what programmers do, is they automate things. And when a project manager looks at it, they say, oh, communication skills, because what they do is communicate. And the business will probably say subject matter expertise. So the ability to sort of understand the inherent biases people have and speak to them in a way that has integrity and reaches them at the same time, it can be a real challenge. You actually might want to change your message a little bit to reach the audience, because you have to meet people where they are at.
And
Matt, I would agree with that 100%. And that really, to me, and I don't know if you've read it or are familiar with it, but that interactional expertise book really turned me on to a lot of ideas and helped me articulate why some testers are really good at that, because it's, the way it's defined is interactional expertise is the expertise in the language of a subject without the expertise in its practice. So your point around, people look at testing, which is a brilliant quote, when people look at testing through the lens of their own experience, being able to articulate testing concepts and ideas and translate information through interactional expertise into the language they understand, I think is, as a test manager or someone who's responsible for the information testing, is a just invaluable skill.
And I think that it even goes farther than that. And I do some training around testing, especially with young testers. And one of the things that I try to tell people is that we need to sell testing, and they don't realize. And we've talked about this a little bit. And when we said, okay, so what automation to do and how will people continue doing their jobs? Taking it some years back, when I was in high school, I actually worked on the family business, and I was selling stuff, and you'll see how this actually gets in there. So, and I remember my grandfather saying, "Hey, you don't sell what you have in the store; you sell what the customer actually wants to buy." And the good salesman is that person who understands what the customer wants to buy, what's important for them, and knows what to show them from what we have in the store. And it took me a lot of time to understand what my grandfather did, but this is exactly what we're doing. And Matt, you said it. When we're going to be selling a bug that needs to be fixed, we need to look into the person making that decision and understand what's going to happen, what's going to be important for them. And if the important part is going to be, hey, how many people are going to be tweeting about it, then say it. Or the important thing is, hey, how many computers will you need to bring up in order to contrast the load inefficiency of the product, then say it. So remember, we're selling, and we're selling ideas, and the only way to sell is to know what the other person wants to buy. And for me, that's communication. Communication is to know how to speak based on the channel that the other person is actually perceiving through. So again, just want to throw that in. Anything else, guys, before we move to the final question here that we have? Okay. On the last point that we have in here, and Lalit, we're talking about it before, and maybe you can take it and pose a question to everyone.
Yeah, sure. So, it's good to see more and more testers are becoming active in our community, but there is still a significant part of our community which I feel is totally unaware of what the rest of us are doing. I realize that when some testers come to me with their problem, I feel that they're living in totally different world and happy with their tick job, as Keith, you rightly say. This badly affects the hard work rest of the community is doing. my question is, how do you think we should wake more and more testers up and bring them into this flow of thinking testers? Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, doing stuff like this, doing webinars, getting the survey out there. This is a great thing. Getting on social media and just evangelizing. I think again, it's probably a bit of confirmation bias on my part, but I think we are starting to evolve as a community, and a lot of the factories are imploding on themselves, and some of those practices that are pretty bad in certain contexts are being discarded, and I think some of that's due to the kind of agile wildfire that's burning throughout technology, but also I think the value proposition of those has kind of run its course. So there's a the industry is ripe for new information and better ways of doing things, and I'm finding a lot of really green fields and for testers who want to be plugged in. If you look at the amount of testers out there in the world, probably 20% of them are what I would call plugged into the community. So there's a huge opportunity still to reach people.
Thanks, Matt. What do you think?
Yeah, there's 4 schools of software testing. Someone once told me there's the hidden 5th school, which is the irrelevant or the don't care school. And those are people that aren't on Twitter, they're not on blogs, they're probably not paid very well, they probably have tough working conditions, and so it's kind of I think that I'm pleased that we're doing this. I think that the blogging and writing is good, but it can be frustrating because there are people who just aren't plugged in, and how do you plug them in? And there are some commercial elements to that. If we think we've discovered a new and better way of working, those folks are probably either going to evolve or they're going to go away. I think the phrase Keith used was imploding, which I think that's a good one. But how do you reach and every now and again you get someone who discovers your blog, or they go to a conference and they get woken up, was the phrase Lalit used, which I think is good, and it's just it's wonderful. And sometimes they go back to their job and they move on to a company that's more enlightened. Sometimes they change their company, and it's great. But how do we get that to happen more often? I think is really tough. One concrete thing I think we can get better at doing is when people Google software testing, how do I do it? And there are keywords and there's search engines and this, but you get a lot of garbage back, and if we can get better at the first site they find is something good, because they will go out to Google and say, gee, we're going to make a mobile app. How do I do that? And if we can, so organic search results, I think at this stage have a better chance of helping the sort of unenlightened, unawake folks. And if you're at a company that's large and some people are awake and some aren't, it's better because you can just email them links to stuff and get them to read it and get them to come to you and say, hey, we keep doing X because X is required by the process, but I keep reading this stuff that says we should try Y. Meanwhile, you think X is dumb and you do it because you have to. And you just kind of nod your head and say, yeah, it sounds like a great experiment to run. I'm pressed for time. But those kind of, if you're in a company that is in the process of waking up, encourage people. Send them links. Send them emails. Start a book club. And that can help accelerate the process. If you're not, I think as the sort of awake, context-driven, whatever you want to call it, testing community, we can get better at finding ways to reach people. Those are my 2 answers.
Thanks. I think we still have some time left. Joel, can you take some questions from audience?
We have about 4 minutes, so I'm going to take here. I guess 2 of the questions that we have in here, and one of them is something that Matt just said. Maybe Keith wants to add to that, and he says, "How do you deal with managers who are not aware about the new testing practices, the communities, the blogs? How can you actually get those testing managers in order to help you out with that, to agree with you on spending time on that?" Keith, what do you think?
So how would you, if the question is, how do you get people to adopt new ideas in the generic sense, that's a very long answer I could give to that, and it's very context-driven in terms of that individual person. But if it's just to get them aware that there'd be new things to do, just start sharing some info, host a lunch and learn. We used to, as Lalitkumar to test too, we used to do this at Barclays a lot, was host lunch and learns, and the test leads would present their ideas or projects or new things over lunch. And, people could grab a sandwich and sit around, and that person will walk us through a webcast of what they're doing. So I think, as I've said many times, changing organizations, changing culture is hard, but if you want to do it, it's a lot of work, and it takes time to understand the person first and what motivates them, and whether, being context aware means understanding whether or not there's a good shot at being successful. So some people just don't want to change, or they'll never see the value in it. So understanding the people involved is probably the most important first step in trying to change that culture. But I would just start sharing information. And the other great thing to do is, and we did this a lot with helping people adopt, like we wanted to use visual test models, is just start using them. And you take on the responsibility for the extra work, and eventually people tend to adopt stuff because it's working better.
Okay. We don't have a lot of time left. So Matt, anything else you want to add to that question at this point?
Just that's great insight. Often you will get resistance from outside ideas. Never heard of him. Who's that guy? All those guys do is they just speak. And if you can bring in mind maps and put them on the wall and get people looking at the mind map and talking about what the risks are on the project, instead of a silly conversation about is testing done, not yet, yes or no, that's improvement. And then people might ask where those ideas came from, and you might be able to answer with less resistance.
Yeah, nobody wants extra homework.
Really? I wonder why. Okay, guys, I think that our time is really, really up. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for the great time. It was tons of fun and tons of learning. So thank you very much for taking part of this. For everyone on the call, again, also thanks for joining. If you have any comments or questions, remember, we have a hashtag state of testing. Hopefully we'll continue talking about this on Twitter a little bit later on. And remember, we will also be sending you the recording, hopefully, again, within the next 24 hours. Now, obviously, if you want to get in touch with us, my personal email is joel@practice.com. Lalit is editor@teatimewithtesters.com. And we're always, always happy to, again, get feedback, questions, anything else we could do from you. Guys, sorry that we couldn't go over all the questions. And again, maybe we will be able to share them so that we can go over them later on. So
take it to Twitter. Right, take it to Twitter if we want. Right, I'm Matt. I'll check on the questions from Twitter if people have them.
Sounds great. And again, I do want to remind that there's the webinar that Matt is going to be doing later this month. Hopefully, we'll also be able to give you a shout about it so that everyone can actually get word of it and attend. Guys, anything else? Closing words, Lalit, maybe?
Well, thank you so much. It was great doing this webinar again, and I look forward to doing more of these with more participation from our community and doing some meaningful stuff going forward. Thanks, Keith and Matt, again. Thank you, Joel, for coordinating. And thank you, everybody, for attending it and making it count. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks a lot. Matt?
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was great. Thanks.
Okay. Bye, guys. Thanks a lot.